This is kind of hard to say, but... What? I had a rather strange experience. It happened at the funeral of my sister-in-law, Alice. After the priest finished the chanting, he whispered to me a message from Alice. Of course, such a thing is impossible in reality, and I was skeptical. Moreover, if it were a message for blood relatives, I could understand, but why me? You see, Alice and I had a distant relationship. The message from Alice was shocking. I immediately called the police, and it led to the ruin of the family. My name is Emily Johnson, 28 years old. I married the heir to a traditional confectionery store 2 years ago. My husband's name is Kevin Johnson, 30 years old. The Johnson family is a prestigious family with a 150-year history. I ended up marrying into such a family because I met Kevin in college. Kevin, a bit of a playboy, wooed me persistently, and I eventually gave in and started dating him. Once we started dating, I found him to be serious and wonderful, and I fell more and more in love with him. We originally planned to marry right after graduating from college, but Kevin's family did not approve. Kevin was even forced into arranged meetings. I once suggested we might be better off breaking up, but Kevin said, "Just wait, I'll convince them." Then one day, my father-in-law fell ill. Knowing he wouldn't last long, we decided to get married. It was because my father-in-law's last wish was to see Kevin married. He had always liked me and wasn't opposed to our marriage. The ones opposed were my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, Alice. But, as the family head, my father-in-law's final wish was respected. And so, I got married, carrying these anxieties with me. A few months after the wedding, my father-in-law passed away. That's when my hell began. Until then, there were no overt hostilities in front of my father-in-law, but now, they did as they pleased. My mother-in-law's mistreatment was especially severe. "When are you gonna quit your job? Didn't you remember? I said I have no intention of quitting when we got married." Really cheeky. What kind of upbringing did you have? "It has nothing to do with my parents." My mother-in-law wanted me to quit my job and become a housewife. There used to be maids, but they had all quit. So, she wanted me to take over all the household chores. Cleaning such a big mansion alone is more than a day's work. She also wanted me to take care of Alice, who lived with us. Alice was frail and always confined to the house. But being frail doesn't mean she was meek. Like a mother, like a daughter. She was tough on me. "Aren't you just trying to take over this house? That won't happen. You might deceive Kevin, but not me." "I am not deceiving anyone, nor do I have any intention of taking over." "I don't know about that. I can see right through you. Just leave already." Then, Alice started coughing. My mother-in-law, who was passing through the hallway, rushed in. "You! What did you do to Alice? Poor Alice. How can you be like this to a sick sister-in-law?" "I'm sorry." Arguing back only makes the lecture longer. At times like this, taking the blame and bearing it was the quickest way out. This kind of harassment from my mother-in-law and Alice was a daily occurrence. My mother-in-law tried to turn me into a servant, and Alice tried to drive me out of the house. I wanted to talk to Kevin about this, but after his father passed away, and he took over the family business, he was too busy and hardly ever home. This was an important time for my job as well. I became a curator right after graduating from college. I'm currently working at a museum. There, a document that's currently the focus of the academic community was unearthed. And I was assisting in its restoration. Once restored, it would surely bring many visitors to the museum and revitalize the area. I was thrilled to be involved in such work. While I'm conducting research here, I also hope to do research abroad in the future. That's why, when I married Kevin, I told him I wouldn't be a housewife and couldn't help with the family business. Kevin supported my ambition to work abroad. So, I thought there'd be no issue with our marriage, but his family had no idea I was planning such things. "You've told them I want to work abroad someday, right? Your mom understands, right?" "Yeah, they know. It's okay, it's all good." He said it so casually. There's no one less trustworthy than someone who repeats the same words twice when it's important. We've had this conversation several times since we got married. "Have you told your mom that I'm not planning to quit my job?" Not yet. Been really busy lately." "I get that, but it's just a little thing. You could just call or something. I think she'd understand if you talked to her. She won't listen to me at all." Yeah. His replies were prompt, but Kevin never actually talked to his mother about it. He probably found the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law issue too troublesome. Whenever he stumbled upon me being scolded by my mother-in-law, he'd leave the scene as if escaping. He had no intention of discussing it. As if my mother-in-law wasn't trouble enough, Alice also caused me distress. Alice was hospitalized a year after our wedding. I had to visit her hospital almost daily. I delivered things from my mother-in-law to Alice and took Alice's laundry back to wash. That was my job. But every time Alice saw me, she showed her disgust. In short, we were like cats and dogs. It was clear Alice disliked me. This had been the case since before we got married. I remember the day I visited the Johnsons to introduce myself. Alice, thank you for making time today. I look forward to our future together. If you're planning to marry into this family, just stop. Huh? Then Alice tilted her head and looked at me as if sizing me up. Because you just don't fit in with us, she said, laughing mockingly. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think of Alice's face when Kevin proposed. But the idea of not marrying because of Alice felt too frustrating, so I accepted the proposal. I had to remind myself that I was marrying Kevin, not Alice. When we got engaged and I visited as his fiancée, Alice's attitude was terrible. Are you after our inheritance? Someone poor like you shouldn't even be here. I might be poor, but I love Kevin. What's that? Gross. I can't believe you can say such a cliché thing. From then until we registered our marriage, I was constantly opposed. There were many days I cried, thinking maybe I should call off the wedding. In the end, it was Kevin's father who convinced them, and we were able to marry. But afterwards, I felt hated, their gazes full of loathing. I once mentioned to Kevin that maybe they thought he was being taken away from them, but he denied it. That's not possible. Alice and I aren't that close as siblings. Really? Yeah, not close at all. Then why do they dislike me so much? Maybe they just physically can't stand me. That was the only explanation I could think of. One day, after finishing the laundry, folding it neatly, and delivering it to Alice, I found her clutching her chest in pain. Alice, are you okay? Don't touch me. As I approached her, Alice vehemently rejected me. She shook off my hand and glared at me. I won't give up until you and Kevin divorce. What are you talking about? Get well and come home. Leave me alone. Ah, you're so irritating. She threw something nearby at me. Being around me seemed to raise her blood pressure, and I started to think it might be better if I stopped visiting. I was worried about her, despite our bad relationship. It was obvious that Alice's health was deteriorating day by day. My presence seemed to stress her and worsen her condition. I think it might be better if you visited her instead of me. What? Are you ordering me around? No, it's just, my visits seem to irritate her, and I'm afraid I'm making her condition worse. I thought so too and told her that, but for some reason, she insists on you coming. What? I couldn't understand it. It was Alice herself who wanted me at the hospital. She just can't stand the thought of me being in charge at home while she's away. But I'm not trying to be in charge. Please tell her that. If I tell her, then I'll have to deliver things myself. I'm too busy for that. Think of yourself as the maid and go ahead. My mother-in-law always claimed to be busy, yet she had time for her nails today. In the end, it was still me who had to visit Alice's hospital before or after work. With my job, early mornings doing household chores, hospital visits, and accompanying my mother-in-law on social visits on my days off, my body was breaking down. One day, I collapsed with a high fever as soon as I got home. But instead of concern, my mother-in-law said, "Really, what a useless daughter-in-law. I wonder why Kevin married you." It was a shock. All my efforts went unrecognized, and I was met only with complaints, not a word of appreciation or concern. I was barely conscious. When I finally came to, it was night. And I was woken up by Kevin, lying on the kitchen floor. Perhaps realizing the seriousness, Kevin took me to the hospital that time. After an hour on and 4, I was sent home. I cursed my resilient body. On the way home, Kevin, driving, said, "You're surprisingly fragile. I thought you were tougher." What's that? Don't you have anything else to say? What do you mean? I realized then, I couldn't stay here anymore. I was exhausted. Luckily, we had no children yet. I thought it wasn't too late to start over and change my life. I want a divorce. What? What are you talking about? Please, let's separate. Cut it out. You don't need to do this to get my attention. I'm serious. Kevin, finally realizing I was serious about wanting a divorce, asked for time and then left me alone. So, I filled out the divorce papers and handed them to him. What are you talking about? This is a joke, right? I'm serious. Then, for some reason, Kevin took the divorce papers to his mother's room. I was disgusted that Kevin involved and relied on his mother for our marital issues. After a while, he came back with an infuriated mother-in-law. What are you thinking, doing something so shameless? I can't live with an unkind family. Do you realize how this divorce will make us look to the outside world? Obviously, my mother-in-law was more concerned about appearances and didn't want us to divorce. I'll do whatever it takes, even go to court, but I want this divorce. I tried my best to convey my desire to separate. The discussion dragged on until late at night. Then, a phone call came. It was from Alice's hospital. Her condition had worsened, and she was in a critical state. The discussion was put on hold. We all headed to the hospital. There, I learned for the first time that Alice had terminal cancer. I had suspected something because her hair looked like a wig, but I couldn't ask. Alice never talked about her illness to me, and Kevin didn't really understand it either. My mother-in-law always told me it was none of my business, so I couldn't inquire. But I never thought it had gotten this bad. The doctor said this week would be critical. My mother-in-law broke down crying, and it was clearly not the time to talk about divorce. Feeling down myself, I couldn't bring up the divorce to Kevin anymore. The following days, until Alice's passing, were quiet. I decided to hold off on the divorce until things settled down. After the funeral, something strange happened. The priest who had finished chanting was looking intently at me. I was curious, but at the time, he said nothing, so I didn't dwell on it. However, during the meal after the funeral, while serving the priest, he whispered to me, "Excuse me, this is difficult to say, but Alice wishes to speak with you." What? I was shocked and froze. The priest said he couldn't clearly see spirits, but he could sense their presence and hear their voices. I had never encountered someone like that and couldn't readily believe him. Don't joke with me, please. If you find it hard to believe, you're welcome to test it. He then spoke about my daily visits to the hospital. Clearly, my mother-in-law or Kevin wouldn't have told the priest such things. What does Alice want to tell me? She says you should leave this house as soon as possible. I was told that repeatedly when she was alive. The thought that she was still trying to tell me this even as a ghost was almost laughable. I thought the priest must know about our family situation, hence his words. I had thought so, but what the priest said next became a reality. If you won't leave this house, then see for yourself. See for myself? I went to Alice's room, as the priest instructed, and found a key. It was for a small rental space, similar in size to a coin locker. Told to look in secret, I opened the space alone. Inside was a single file. What's this? It was the confectionary's secret accounting book. After the previous owner, my father-in-law, fell ill, my mother-in-law had taken over the accounting. She had been siphoning off some of the revenue for herself and even committing tax evasion. I showed this to Kevin and discussed it with him. Damn it! What was Alice thinking? Did you know about this? Of course, I was in on it with Mom. Why would you do such a thing? Because our family is in debt. What? My mother-in-law had a habit of extravagant spending on shopping, spas, and more. Kevin had inherited this trait, splurging on designer goods and frequently changing cars as he pleased. Concerned, my father-in-law had intended to entrust Alice with money management, but somehow my mother-in-law had taken over that role. But without money, she couldn't enjoy her favorite shopping. So, a mass layoff of employees was also carried out. Even that wasn't enough, and they had to let go of the housemaids. Personally, I thought it would make more sense to let go of employees before the maids, but for my mother-in-law, the employees were dispensable. The remaining employees were overburdened, and the quality of work declined. I suppose they only kept those willing to work for low wages. I found their selfishness for personal gain unforgivable. Yet, I wondered why Alice had told me this. Despite her dislike for me. Then, it dawned on me. Alice's attempts to prevent my marriage and drive me out after were all to avoid involving me. I felt pathetic. Alice had been trying to protect me all along. If this secret money came to light, the family business would face public backlash. She probably didn't want me involved. She wanted me to leave without knowing anything. Her insistence on my daily hospital visits was likely to hasten my departure. She probably planned to expose the secret money after I left. But since I stayed longer than expected, she resorted to telling me through the priest. She had chosen to rely on me, fearing the key might be discovered and covered up by Kevin or my mother-in-law. Alice seemed to know I was considering divorce. The priest also said, "Alice says, if you publicize it in my name after the divorce, it won't trouble you." I was moved to tears, realizing she had thought so much about me. If I did it sneakily, it would be noticeable. It was only a matter of time before I got caught. I hurriedly reported it to the police. Kevin, the current president, was arrested first on charges of embezzlement and tax evasion. As his wife, I was also questioned. The police were quite suspicious of me, being a family member. However, it was proven that my mother-in-law had been doing this unilaterally even before I joined the family, clearing me of suspicion. The issue inevitably became a big deal, and it was reported in some weekly magazines as a tax evasion scandal involving a prestigious confectionery. "It's your fault. None of this would have happened if you hadn't reported it to the police. I found evidence of a crime. It was my duty to report it. Now the Johnson family is ruined. How are you going to fix this?" Kevin was breaking down in tears. He was then taken away by the guards to be tried in court. The divorce papers were accepted, and I was able to successfully get a divorce. Later, my mother-in-law, who was in charge of the accounting, also had her charges solidified and was arrested. Before being taken away, she met with me. "Help me! Clear my charges, please! You need to properly atone for your crimes. It's for the sake of your late husband and Alice." "I don't care about that. The living are more important. Just say one word, that your mother-in-law wasn't involved, and it'll be fine." "I can't do that." She was afraid she might be arrested the next day. "Mom, this is what they call reaping what you sow. Please, don't abandon me." It was astonishing that she, who had tormented me for so long, was asking for my help. Ultimately, she was arrested the next day. I was called in for questioning by the police several times. In that house without a housemaid, I was the only one who could testify. I didn't know anything, so I can't be much help in the investigation. When I told the police that, they showed me Alice's file. The file found in the rental space had been confiscated by the police. To my surprise, Alice had meticulously detailed the information in the file so it wouldn't trouble me. My mother-in-law was claiming that it was a fake file created by me, given that Alice and I were on bad terms, and the police were investigating its authenticity. "It's not a fake. Alice was deliberately cold to me on purpose." Saying this out loud made me feel Alice's clumsy kindness all the more. I couldn't help but start crying. The file's authenticity was confirmed through handwriting analysis. My mother-in-law's lies only added to her charges. When I visited her in detention, she had lost weight. She just glared at me resentfully without saying a word. Though I saw her crying when I left. She seemed to have a little regret for what she had done. The transformation greed can cause in a person horrified me. After things quieted down, I received a letter. It was from my mother-in-law. Expecting a letter full of resentment, I was surprised to find an apology instead. An apology to me wouldn't change anything. She was likely showing remorse to gain an advantage in her trial. I was scheduled to testify in court. On the day of the trial, "I've seen my mother-in-law going to nail salons and spas many times. I myself was made to drive her more than once." I testified to that. My mother-in-law just looked at me, dumbfounded. She probably thought the letter would change my statement. I was treated like a servant by my mother-in-law. All the maids and helpers were let go, and she tried to use me as a replacement. Many employees were also laid off. "Hey! Don't say unnecessary things." She stood up, but the judge ordered her to sit down quietly. She had testified that she committed tax evasion out of necessity due to debts and her daughter's medical expenses, but it was determined that she did it for personal gain. As I left the courtroom, she was crying and glaring at me. That was the last time I saw my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law and Kevin were, of course, found guilty and had to pay additional taxes. This included penalties like late fees and interest taxes. My mother-in-law, burdened with debt, was unable to pay, so ultimately Kevin had to shoulder all the payments. However, Kevin, unable to pay, had the house seized, and effectively, he lost everything. It was the file Alice left behind that exposed everything. After being released on parole, Kevin and his mother apparently got together. It turned into a nasty argument, seemingly out of control. "It's your fault for not protecting me. You started it, Mom. I lost Emily because of this. So what about that woman? It's all her fault in the first place. Don't speak ill of Emily. I truly loved her." They caused a scene in the store and were eventually thrown out. Living alone, my mother-in-law was hounded by some media, seemingly becoming neurotic. Reporters even showed up at her workplace, a supermarket, revealing her past as the owner of a prestigious confectionery. She eventually had to quit. Now, she seems to be suffering from depression and receiving social welfare. Thus, the prestigious confectionery with 150 years of history came to a close. Kevin and his mother were saddled with massive debt, effectively leading to their bankruptcy. They apparently owed a significant amount to various relatives and are now struggling to repay it. Kevin once appeared before me. It was during New Year, and I was at my parents' home. I hadn't given Kevin my current address or new contact details, so he visited the home he knew I'd be at for the holidays. "Mom's a bit senile now. It's tough." "So what?" "I have to repay debts, and I can't afford to put her in a facility. There's no one else to take care of her." "What? You're not asking me to take care of her, are you?" "Ah, you got it. I have no one else to ask but you, Emily." Kevin and his mother were shunned by relatives, leaving them with no one to turn to. But it was absurd to think they could rely on me. "How could you ask me? Do you think I would take care of your mother? Besides the tax evasion, you know I was constantly mistreated in that house, right? Did you ever stand up for me?" Well, as I vented my anger, Kevin finally seemed to understand that he couldn't rely on me. "There's no one else. Relatives, friends, they've all turned their backs. That's the consequence of what you and your mother did. I regret not having a better relationship with Alice." As for my job, sadly, being called in by the police frequently led to rumors at work, and I was soon transferred to a different department. Unable to conduct research, I decided to leave the company. This decision was, in fact, influenced by Alice. I inherited a part of her estate. In the rental space, along with the file, there was a bank book and a seal. She had left a note. "If you end up divorcing, use this to take a step forward." The note thanked me for taking care of her and encouraged me to move on. I hadn't realized it, but I couldn't believe I received such a thing. I visited the priest again to see if I could talk to Alice one more time. But Alice was no longer around me. "The deceased's feelings are her utmost effort. Accept them gratefully and use them for your benefit and for the world." I decided to go for it and study abroad. Not when the time comes, but now. I wanted to be a researcher and contribute to the world. Now, I'm working hard abroad, alone. The Johnson family was a terrible place, but meeting Alice allowed me to step forward early. I'm grateful to her for giving me that courage.